Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Hello everyone. Today we are going to discuss two sections of the Russian formalism, Fabula and Syuzhet, and Russian formalism revisited. Okay, last time we talked about the main or the basic assumption of the theory, i.e. Which can be summarized by the term defamiliarization. Okay, just to remind you of that, the claim was that the language of the text is defamiliarized through devices. And through this process of defamiliarization, we have the language attracts the readers to itself so that meanings are fresh and new in the world. Okay, Russian formalists focused on this perspective to poetry. Okay. Now the question, what about fiction? For example, novels, stories, shorter stories, etc. So they started to do their search within their assumption of defamiliarization. Now, they argued that what distinguishes the language of fiction from ordinary language is the difference. Okay, and this difference resides in what they called presentation. And presentation, again, is achieved by a process of defamiliarization. So our question is how this process works. So this part of the lecture will answer this question. They introduced two concepts, the fabula and the Syuzhet, okay, or Syuzhet. Anyway, this is a Russian word. Now, what is the fabula? The fabula is a straightforward account of something, or it tells us what actually happened. So, for any story, it has a basic structure and underlying structure. This structure tells what actually happens, okay? We'll come to examples later on. And the Syuzhet are the variants, okay, the variants or the variations, if you like, of this fabula. Fine. So, while we have the fabula, which is the straightforward account of something, it is the factual thing, the structure of the tale or the story, then we have variations. Variations take place by devices which achieve the process of what we call, again, defamiliarization. So for them, the fabula is the bare bones, okay, of any story that one finds in a countless private eye novels, for example, detective stories, folk tales, etc. Okay. For example, in all detective novels, the author manipulates the fabula to create maximum suspense. Such a manipulation of the fabula creates the Syuzhet, or the story as it actually told, and it is the Syuzhet that has the defamiliarizing effect that devices have in poetry. Okay. Now, Prob, or Vladimir Prob, is genius in discovering this fact, okay, in his book, and that is published in 1928, The Morphology of the Folk Tales. He studied the structure of countless number of Russian folk tales and fairy tales. To our surprise, he discovered that most of those folk tales have only one underlining or several underlining structures. Imagine. Okay, i.e. in folk tales, he tries to show how hundreds or 100 different tales are in fact variation upon, or let's say, Syuzhets of what he seemed to be one and the same underlining fabula. Okay. We come to an example of this. Okay, Prob's revolutionary idea at the time that 100 rather than widely varying folk tales and fairy tales might actually tell one and the same underlining story. Okay, now this comes through the distinction between the fabula and the Syuzhet. So let me repeat this idea now. We have a structure, a basic structure of any tale, any story, that within genres, of course, and this basic story is the bone, okay, the bare bone, the skeleton of any story, and this is called fabula. Now, when we come to the variations of different stories, okay, they are achieved by what he called Syuzhets, okay, and those are, let's say, different ways of dealing with the story, and different names, different contexts, different places, okay, etc. So, how is this possible? How could all these tales possibly be representations of the same basic story? Prob very ingeniously solves this problem by thinking of the terms actors and functions. Be careful to those two concepts, actors and functions, by which he means acts or events that crucially help the story along. So we have stories, okay, having a basic structure, but we have actors and actions which help the variation. So let me give you this example. Now we have a very, let's say, common tale. For example, a hero wants to rescue a princess, okay, from another place. So this is the basic structure. Think of it this way. A hero, okay, or a prince travels to some other place to rescue a princess. Now, in this basic structure, we have so many variants, if you like, or variations of this story. Those variations are the Syuzhet. Let's detail in this. For example, in the first, we have, for example, four, let's say, tales. In the first one, the hero is given an eagle, which carries him to another kingdom. In the second one, the hero is given a horse that gets him there. In a third tale, he is presented with a boat. And in the fourth one, he is given a ring that magically produces a number of men who carry him where he wants to go. Look at this. Now we have four means of transportation. Okay, the first one is the eagle. Okay, the second one is, let's say, a horse. The third one is a boat, and the fourth is a ring. So these four elements are the Syuzhets, okay, i.e. they cause the variance which create different stories. Fine. You see, the basic structure is that a hero moves from one place to another. Here we have an act of moving. Fine. This act of moving is achieved by different means of, let's say, transportation, if we may use this term. These variances, okay, these variations cause what we call the Syuzhets, which create different stories. Okay, so now here we have endless ways of looking at stories from this, let's say, perspective. If we look at let's say, mysteries, if we look at the detective stories, we have, for example, the hero, villain, and the seeker. Okay, we have all the time we have two rounds. First of all, the seeker wants to, okay, to help the hero find the truth about the villain. He fails in first, but succeeds in the second, but in different ways. So the countless ways through which the hero finds his way to solve the problem, now they are called the Syuzhets, okay, of the same fabula, which definitely tells that the hero will win at the end. So now Prob might have proposed a basic fabula which with the three acts or functions, that murdering, of the getting murder, and of exposing the killer. So this is another way or another example of looking at the fabula. We have okay, as you can see here, we have a murder, we have someone who is murdered, and we have a killer. So these are the basics, but with different detective stories, those are changed from one story to another. Okay, now the assumption or the conclusion of this very quick section is that either folk tales, detective stories, or other kinds of genre contain an underlying structure, okay, basic structure, okay, of which the unsuspecting reader will usually not be aware of. And the process of representation, if you like, through defamiliarization, through changing the way this story is told, the way the helpers, okay, of the story, the zozets of the story, will create the variation, thus the defamiliarization effect of the tales. So this is how the Russian formalists dealt with the idea of, let's say, prose. Now, I'll come back to this point, but now let's move to the basic question that has been left from the previous lecture, which is the inherent ability of devices to defamiliarize, okay? And that was, as we have claimed towards the end of the last, let's say, lecture or recording, that this was wrong. Let's us, first of all, uncover or unfold this way of, or this mistake. First of all, let's go back to the Russian formalists actually are positivists in one way or another, i.e. they are after systematic science. They are after generalization. So the wrong generalization, okay, that literary devices or the devices have inherent ability to what? To defamiliarize. Fine? So now I'm here on page, if you like to follow with me, on page 40, on the top of the page. Formalism had seen a poem as the totality of its devices, okay, as the footing of a column of devices that were not necessarily related in any way. Apart from that, it had assumed that literariness was the product of the inherent qualities of those devices. So this is their basic assumption. Let me just paraphrase what I have read here. The poem, okay, the literary text, the poem in particular, is a combination of something that is formed, okay, from devices. And the devices that we have mentioned, like rhyme, rhythm, alliteration, whatever of those devices. I.e., whenever I see a text that has those devices, then this is what? A poem. This is a poem that achieved a certain degree of literariness, okay? So those qualities and the resulting literariness could be identified, pointed at. Wherever you see rhyme, this is the familiar. This was their former, let's say, claim. Fine? Here, and this is where the early formalism went wrong. How is this? How is this wrong assumption? Okay? As we said, they are after generalizations, they are after, okay, making rules, but this is not an easy process. Sometimes, okay, we have to react about or to reconsider these rules. First of all, let me tell you that Russian formalists are clever, are smart, okay? Sorry, simply because they reconsidered their position, fine? And by reconsidering this position, they come up with a new thing. And this is how critical thinking works in the first place, if you like, okay? For example, when people are strict, are rigid, okay, about certain idea, and they do not give it up, they do not revise it or reconsider it, okay, the idea will remain no matter how it entails some wrong assumptions, etc. But those people are very responsive in a sense, okay? They, what we call, they reconsidered their own, okay, their own assumption. So how is this happen? Now, as we have said, the claim was that those devices have inherent, ركزوا على كلمة inherent ability of what? Of defamiliarization. And this is the wrong assumption. Okay? Let me say how is it wrong. Now imagine that you are reading a poem, okay? For example, a sonnet with 12 lines that are rhymed, okay? And then we have 2 lines that are unrhymed. So the question is rhyming now a defamiliarizing process or unrhyming is a defamiliarizing process? The answer will be the unrhyming. So here if we, the rhyme in another text, for example, or poem, we have unrhymed poem for, let's say, 20 lines. But as all of a sudden, we have 3 or 4 lines which are rhymed. So rhyme here becomes a defamiliarizing process. So from one perspective, it is defamiliarizing. From another one is familiarizing, which is the same basic element, i.e. rhyming. How is this works? This is wrong if we say that rhyming is absolutely okay, is abstract, in abstract terms, is a defamiliarizing device. So here they moved into this thing, into another idea. It depends on the context. وركزوا معي هون لأنه هاي النقلة اللي راح تأدينا للstructuralism, our understanding of structuralism. Fine? But this is an early question. But keep have it in your mind. Keep having it in your mind. Now, here the claim is, or the new claim is, it or the device manifests itself only in the right context. Now we start to talk about context. Okay, context and structure. Be careful about this. Okay, now we have the poem or the literal text as a context in itself. Fine. So in this particular place, this device works as a familiarizing process device. In another, it works simply as a defamiliarizing process. You see, or element. The only rule that can be formulated is that defamiliarization works by a way of contrast or difference. Okay, this is this is an extremely important statement, which will later on lead, okay, us to what we call structuralism. لكن خلونا هلا من structuralism. Let's focus on this sentence. The only rule that can be formulated is that defamiliarization works by a way of contrast or difference. Okay, how is that? Now, if I have a poem, as I have said, which is all rhymed, okay, but within this rhyming, okay, or jam of rhyming, now I have 2 unrhymed lines. So rhyming here works as a familiarizing, okay, device. The other way around, if I have a poem that is all unrhymed, and then I have, let's say, a couple of lines or 3 lines, 4 lines, a stanza that is rhymed. So rhyming here attracts the reader's attention. Why is rhyming here? So this is the defamiliarization of this poem. So how is this achieved? By contrasting, okay, by contrasting the rhyming or the rhymed lines from the unrhymed lines and the vice versa. You see the point? And this is how the Russian formalists geniusly solved this problem, okay, which again will later on lead to further assumptions. Okay, so let me read now towards the bottom of page 40 here. The first paragraph, the last 4 lines. Because the early formalists presupposed a too rigid connection between a fixed set of devices and the principle of literalness, they did not see the devices that they regarded as the building blocks of literary text in their proper light. So this is wrong. Now, they gradually gave up this position when it became clear that to identify the various ways in which literature differed from ordinary language was only the first step toward explaining how literature works. Okay? Now, I have talked a lot about this, in fact, in the principle of differentiation, لكن حنزوره later on, inshallah. Now, let me move to page 41, okay, 41, if you like. Here is the example I've just mentioned, which is, let's first look at defamiliarization. أساس تعرف وين أنا أقرأ. Within one and the same literary text. Imagine a long poem consisting of a heroic couplet, iambic pentameter lines of 10 syllables, with rhyme scheme A, B, B, C, C, and so on. Okay? Carried along by its rather monotonous cadence, where suddenly come across two non-rhyming lines of 14 syllables each. These two lines function to defamiliarize the reading process because they make us stop and think. Okay? But this works also the other way around. Imagine a long poem of unrhymed lines sorry, okay, of 14 syllables, each of which you suddenly come across heroic couplets. Now, the heroic couplets would have the function of making us stop and think. You see the point now? It's very, let's say, confusing. From one perspective, the unrhyming, from the other perspective, the rhyming. But ultimately, both will achieve the same process of defamiliarization and then causing us to stop and think about the new meanings in the text. Now, here it says, to take this a bit further, the ability to defamiliarize our perception is not the quality that certain techniques inherently possess. It is all a matter of how certain techniques function within a given literary work, and that function can change from one text to text. Okay, this is the new assumption. And this is the what will lead us, okay, to another theory, if you like, to structuralism. خليني أرجع لهاي الفكرة، فكرة مهمة للغاية. Now, if the ability, okay, to defamiliarize our perception, i.e. to make us see the world of the text as a new and fresh and different from ordinary language, okay, is not the devices themselves or the inherent, okay, qualities of the device or devices themselves, but how they function. And how they function is where they exist in the right place by the principle of differentiation, by the principle of making them different from other ones. Okay? Now here, Russian formalism starts to a new, let's say, discourse. Rather than talking about devices, things like these, now they start to talk about different things. Okay? Function, place, text, structure. You see? Now, everything here depends on the way it functions within a given text. This is another generalization. Everything in a text depends on the way it functions within a given text. This led to a view that a literary work as a system that establishes a textual environment that is again and again made new with the help of defamiliarizing process. Okay? It is not only the text itself, but the whole genre of literature, as the Russian formalists claim, that it renews itself, okay, from one period into another by a process of defamiliarization. The emergence of genre, okay, the emergence of different, let's say, ways of literary genre in particular or subgenres, according to them, is a process of defamiliarization, of renewing things so that they always look fresh and new. Here we have also, as they claim, the whole system. Now, this has actually caused a lot of, let's say, difference in the emergence of realism. Okay, let me go to page 42, in fact. Okay, the top of 42. We all know that literature has changed over time. Okay, see, the literature is changing. It's changing its genres in particular. In the old ancient literature, we have the epic. Okay, we have the tragedies, but now they disappeared. Okay, we in favor of other things. What has happened? According again to Russian formalists, probably they are wrong, but this is what they claim. The question is why? Why do new genres emerge? لاحظوا السؤال. Why do new genres emerge? The novel, احنا نعرف انه شكل جديد من الادب. For instance, and only one disappear over the cultural horizon. Why do a new genre emerge and other genres disappear? Okay, take the example of the epic compared to the novel. The epic disappeared and the novel emerged, according to formalists. Okay, and why do we find such rather considerable changes within genres themselves? حتى الجنرا نفسها. Okay, the novel هسه حنشوف has gone from realism, okay, mid and the late 19th century, to modernism, and in the early 20th century, and postmodernism in the 60s and beyond. Again, the formalists' answer will come as a surprise. Defamiliarization. You see, they insist on this term, defamiliarization. Literature as a whole renews itself through the development, okay, of, for instance, new genres, while genres defamiliarize and thereby change themselves throughout. Sorry. For example, parody, a defamiliarizing strategy, okay, because it invariably focuses on peculiarities and through the incorporation of new materials and techniques taken from other genres of popular culture. And this is a very long discussion that I'm not going into it in details. Okay, what is important to me here, and I'm left only, I believe, with 3 minutes, okay, that this shift in the position of the Russian formalists will lead us to another theory, okay, another way of looking at literature, which is the, let's say, let me put it in this way. Now we have Russian formalists. This theory travels, okay, it takes its journey to Prague. Prague is a connection between, let's say, the Western world and the Eastern world, okay? Prague School or Prague Structuralism, which will be the topic of our next lecture, and then Russian formalism, or let's say structuralism, and then we have the structuralism as a term, okay? But we'll see how the dynamics of thoughts or the history of Western thought works so that they produce new theories and new ways of thinking when they are combined, merged to each other, okay? And this, in fact, happens or repeats itself with the classic Marxism to Western or new Marxism, which again we'll, inshallah, look at later on. So I will stop here at the Prague structuralism. Okay, just to summarize quickly what I have said today, starting from the Fabula and Syuzhet. Okay, this is the other, okay, let's say digression of when we talk about the function, okay, of the tale, rather than talking about the, let's say, tale itself. Here we have a basic structure for all stories or all genres of stories that is told in one way. But we have other embroidering elements, Syuzhets, okay, if you like, or variations or variants through which stories are told. Those are the renewable elements. The example of the hero who travels in different ways to rescue the princess. The other topic that I've discussed today is how the Russian formalists went wrong by claiming that devices have inherent ability of defamiliarization, and then how they managed, okay, to correct this position by talking about how they function rather than the inherent ability, and how they function in a right context, in a right text, through a principle of making difference, of differentiation. And any one of you who has at least some idea about structuralism will see that this is very close to a structuralist assumption. Okay, thank you very much, and we'll meet inshallah by Prague structuralism, French structuralism in our next lecture.